So I just want to welcome all of you here today and thank you for coming. It's actually really great to be a part of a community gathering at Barnard. Even though we're still in the pandemic, we're all going to be extra safe. We ask you to wear your masks while you're in the room unless you're presenting. And of course, afterwards, we'll have some breakfast. You can certainly take your mask off at that point when we're eating. So this is part of the Barnard Engages program. My name is Premila Addison, and I'm the co-PI, the faculty co-PI, along with Nara Milanich. And this is a grant that is funded by the Mellon Foundation. The purpose of it is to develop long-term community partnerships with organizations in New York City around a number of different themes. The three main themes are immigration, labor rights, and poverty. And Barnard has a really wonderful long history of community engagement, and there are people in this room who have been doing that work for a long time. So I see this grant as really part of a broader trajectory of what Barnard has been doing, and I think we need to recognize and acknowledge some of that other work that's been going on. One of the things about this grant that I think is interesting and builds on that other work is that this is really community directed. So built into the grant is the idea that faculty and students are not the experts around these issues of poverty, immigration, and labor, but we really want to take the lead from our community partners and understand what they need and try to support the kind of organizing work that they're doing. This is the second year of the grant, I believe. I'm not exactly sure of the timing. I think it's the second year of the grant. The second year of the course is being taught. And we have courses in a number of different departments: environmental science, urban studies, history. We have a course in education that's going to be taught soon. I think when we initially applied for this grant, we had a lot of visions about how that would work. The pandemic has made that more difficult in a lot of ways. And people who've taught the courses know how hard that has been, because the idea behind the grant is to build a partnership. And that often happens a lot better if you're able to meet with people and talk to people and see where they're doing their work. But I think nevertheless, the courses have gone off fairly well, and people have developed really, I think, close relationships and sustained partnerships that have continued even beyond the courses themselves. I just want to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, to the Provost's office, to Linda Bell, and especially Sarah Green, who has provided the administrative support for the courses, to the development office, and Kari Steves, especially, who was important in writing the grant and helping administer it, to the Community Engagement and Inclusion Office and its Executive Director, Kimmy Jones, the Center for Engaged Pedagogy, and Jennifer Rosales. So today we're going to have some presentations from some students, 3 students, and a couple faculty members to talk about their experiences. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tahila Cherry.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tahila. I'm a senior at Barnard. I'm studying environment and sustainability. And last fall, I took the workshop for sustainable development, which is the junior capstone course for my major. So yes, I took this class during the heat of the pandemic, and I actually think, it made the class more difficult, but it made it so much more rewarding, because I felt like, even though it was online and it was so hard to even go outside or enjoy my classes, I was able to make a genuine contribution to the community and to the class itself. So basically, we worked with We Act for Environmental Justice, which is an environmental justice nonprofit that focuses on Upper Manhattan. And we were working with them and the New York City Housing Authority to develop recommendations to deal with extreme heat in NYCHA housing. New York gets really, really hot because of the urban heat island effect. So during the summer, especially in NYCHA housing where a lot of people don't have AC units or central AC, it gets super hot and unbearable, and it's just like a bad situation. So we learned all about what extreme heat looks like, and then tried to develop recommendations for how to monitor it. So we worked basically as a consulting group for We Act. We were one class, but we were split into 4 or 5 different groups. So we had a heat monitoring group where people tested different temperature devices. We made heat maps, and we also just made a whole, I want to say, pamphlet is too short. We made a little book about extreme heat and its impacts. And so it was really awesome to learn about all these things, and also to work collaboratively. I think this was the only class I've taken at Barnard where we worked as a team with one goal. And we met twice a week. We met one time with our instructor and one time by ourselves. So we were kind of working on our own, just with a main deadline where we had to give our deliverables. And so everything else, we just worked within our small teams and as a class to figure out our timeline and how we were going to work throughout the semester to get all this stuff done. And we got it done, which is really cool. And had a lot of fun doing it. I think it was really exciting to learn about the nonprofit sector a little bit, and also consulting, while also still being in a modified classroom setting. I personally learned a lot about extreme heat, which was cool. And about NYCHA, I think I came into it with a big distaste generally for like public programs, I guess. And then I learned over the course of the class, of the project, like, wow, it's much more complicated. And people are trying really hard to serve their community and don't have that many resources to make it happen. So it felt really good to be able to help, even if it was just a little bit, to provide resources or recommendations to alleviate extreme heat. So overall, it was a really, really awesome experience. Definitely a unique course. I've never taken anything like it at Barnard. I don't expect to take anything like it for the rest of my college experience. And it was just really fun and awesome. So yeah, thank you.
So I taught a course in the spring of 2021 called Pandemic Tales. It was a partnership with a migrant workers organization in Lower Manhattan that is called Damayan, Migrant Workers Association, that focuses on organizing and supporting labor trafficking survivors. It's an organization I've known for a number of years and worked with them. And I had planned the partnership before the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, they were really at the forefront of trying to provide assistance. A lot of their members are based in Queens, the organization is based in Queens. And if you remember at that moment, Queens was the hardest hit part of New York City. And so they asked us to actually document the impact of the pandemic on their members and the work that they have been doing to support the Filipino community. They asked us to produce a report. So the students did oral histories of members. Each student did one oral history or interview. And then we produced a report. It's actually it ended up being a lot bigger than we anticipated, a 45-page report. And I have to say, I didn't do a lot. I helped proofread some things, but the students did this work. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. And so I'm really proud of the work that the students did on this. And we worked very, very closely with the organization at every step of the way, from conceiving what the report would look like, what the themes would be, to we actually had a press conference at the end of the semester where they invited all of their members and their supporters, as well as some public officials, to learn a little bit more about the work that they had done. So it was very collaborative, a lot of communication back and forth. And I think, like Tahila said, I think one of the similarities is this collaborative nature of the work. And I think it's so important that we think about that because it really pushes back against the individualism that is so prevalent in higher education. So students were working not for their own grade and not for themselves and not so they would have their names on something, but really to be a part of a collective effort that was not necessarily for them, but was for somebody else. So the students learned, I think, both about what it means to collaborate, what it means to work with an organization such as this, how to decenter themselves, how to put their own needs and desires aside. But they also learned the content. So they did a lot of research on Filipino immigration to the United States, the status of low-wage workers. Most of the members are domestic workers or labor trafficking survivors. And so it was really eye-opening, I think, for them. I have one of my students here, Arij Kadir, who's going to talk a little bit about her experiences.
Thank you, Professor Nadesan, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Arij. I'm a current junior at Barnard, and I'm studying urban studies and public health on the pre-med track. And I was one of the students in Professor Nadesan's course, Pandemic Tales. I could really talk to you all about Pandemic Tales for like an entire hour. It was my favorite class that I've taken in undergrad, high school, because it really is so much more than just a class. And it really challenged me to reimagine what my role is as a student and a community member, all in the course of one jam-packed semester. So tell you a little bit about the course from my point of view. Pandemic Tales was a community collaboration between Barnard students in the seminar Curated Conversations with Migrant Workers and the Demayan Migrant Workers Association. The goal of this class was to uplift the stories of New York City's Filipino migrant workers who have struggled during the pandemic with hardships such as cutoffs, layoffs, and a lack of governmental financial relief due to their undocumented status. But in addition to working with the course, it was a history class. So we also learned about the history of migrant workers. We learned about the power of storytelling. And we also conducted interviews with Filipino migrant workers who were Demayan members. And as a capstone to this course, we published a report on the impact of COVID-19 on the migrant workers, which we debuted at a public virtual event, which was kind of like a virtual press conference. I was on the virtual event planning team, and that was definitely a really big part of my experience, which I'll get into a little bit more. And I also created a podcast that looked at undocumented status as a social determinant of health. And this podcast basically engaged with content from interviews from all of my classmates, even though we were all tasked with conducting one interview. The class was very collaborative. So after talking to my students, I learned that it might be useful and impactful to maybe put it in the form of a podcast, and Demayan thought that that would be helpful. So that was also a really great experience that I had as part of the coursework. So I'm somebody who really likes podcasting. I have my own podcast, but this class was really unique because it really forced me to challenge everything that I previously knew about podcasting or community engagement, really anything like that. So for the specific sphere of conducting the interviews, we first had to have lessons on how to conduct an interview because our goal from the beginning was not to just extract information and publish it. And even if this isn't your intention, oftentimes like we have biases and underlying goals that can kind of cloud this. So Professor Nadesan and Demayan really challenged us to kind of rethink the process of how we interact with our community members. We actually had a professional storyteller come to our class to teach us a little bit about the process, and we each conducted 30-minute interviews, and there were questions given about how migrant workers' housing, food, and other daily aspects of life were impacted by the pandemic. And this class was really different than any other that I've taken because it was a model of campus community engagement that was not extractive. It was one where our community partner, Demayan, was really kind of taking the lead on decisions. And we had a living syllabus for the class, which I thought was really interesting. It was basically a live Google Doc, and we were told that it could change at any point if Demayan wanted it to, which was really nice. And it challenged me to kind of rethink other community engagement models that I was a part of in high school, because prior to Pandemic Tales, anytime I did community work, we would have like a pre-prescribed framework and blueprint for what the community project would be. And we would essentially enter the community and then meet with the organization at the very end after all the work had already been done to present our findings. But that's really not what it's about. We should always be centering kind of the goal and the mission of the community members who are impacted and involved. And that's what this community partnership really taught me. And something else that I learned about community engagement from the course was that it really should be treated like a professional experience. And I feel like oftentimes in college and in high school, students kind of look at volunteer experience as like a separate aspect of their life. But through collaborating with Demayan as a member of the final event team, I attended weekly meetings with Demayan members, leaders, and organizers who put students in their shoes. And we were basically tasked to look at the organization from their eyes rather than just like what I had previously thought a volunteer experience would be. So it was a really, really impactful experience, and I would highly encourage you all to look at our report. I love Barnard Engages. I've taken 3 classes so far, and I would really, really love to take more. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Arij. Arij is also in one of my Barnard Engages courses, so happy to see her here as well. My name is Mary Rocco, and I teach in the Urban Studies program. My partnership is with the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative that works in the Bronx. The Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative uses economic democracy as the theory of change, and they define that as being sort of community ownership that will lead to community wealth. So they have projects that are attempting to get land in the hands and ownership of communities, as well as cooperative businesses and a number of other projects. We work directly with the Planning and Policy Lab, and our partner there was Catherine Maya. In 2019, BCDI partnered with a number of Bronx organizations, community organizations, calling themselves the Bronx-wide Coalition. There's about 12 organizations that are part of that, and they embarked on a community planning process. My discipline is city planning, specialization in community development, and community planning processes, for those of you who are not familiar, can take quite a while. So in 2019, all these organizations came together to embark on what they would consider a Bronx-wide community plan across 7 sectors that were identified by their community constituents. So health, food security, housing and land use, education, economic development and workforce, transportation and mobility, and manufacturing and technology. And we really were brought in to help partner on the housing and land use front, although housing and land use really spills over into all of them. That's why the whole process is comprehensive. So in the spring of 2020, I piloted the course in my neighborhoods and community development course and worked with Catherine and other folks at BCDI to identify about 10 neighborhoods that we would conduct community planning profiles in. So students collected data, they collected qualitative data, quantitative data, they went to the Bronx. Luckily, they went to the Bronx just before, one time, just before everything shut down, and then we were challenged to continue the course remotely, and they were unable to continue visiting the sites. From that, we developed a series of neighborhood profiles that were used by BCDI to sort of formulate some of their outreach efforts and as data indicators for the planning process. And then the pandemic struck, and some of the challenges of working with community-based organizations during the pandemic, as Pramila alluded to, are that they're doing their own internal work and trying to shore up resources for their communities, the communities that they serve. So we were sort of challenged to remain flexible, even as we tried to plan for what the fall would be. In the fall, students participated in an immersive course, and this is a junior seminar that focuses on the dynamics of neighborhood change and gentrification. And those students worked in teams to sort of unpack the New York City executive budget, which a colleague of mine in a policy school said that he would never have his graduate students touch the New York City budget. I said, well, my undergraduates are doing a great job. But to sort of recategorize it to create a people's budget survey. So they were identifying all of the many, many lines of the budget to repackage it into something that would serve as an education tool about budgeting and how budget priorities are determined. In addition to that, the students also developed data indicators and an asset-based neighborhood assessment tool that added health and community resilience to traditional community development indicators. And then in the spring of 2021, the students in the neighborhoods and community development piloted the tool that was developed by the students in the fall class. And throughout these different interactions, BCDI, our partner organization, came into class, met with students, attended midterm presentations, attended final presentations, provided feedback on the work, and also, unfortunately, had in the original plan we had been planning to go to the Bronx several times, and that was unfortunately not the case. But the students, I think, really did a fantastic job, and we ended up creating sort of a proposal that they could then use for funding to support the plan. In the summer of 2021, I created the Community Planning Lab and hired 2 fellows, one from the fall semester, 2020 semester, and then one that would be embarking on the fall 2021 semester. And those students really worked to create what became the Bronx People's Budget Tool survey. And we worked with the Empirical Reasoning Center. We've connected with some activists in the Sunrise Movement who were activists by night and tech people by day. So that really helped for us to develop a leaner tool that was much more intuitive for community residents. And we also attended with BCDI the People's Assemblies in the Bronx, which brought together residents around these 7 sectors to sort of plan. And students really were able to engage with community members, with BCDI through a number of meetings. And then we rolled into the fall where we launched the Bronx People's Budget Survey at the Bronx People's Festival in October. And students have been working on collecting data to identify who owns some of the vacant, potentially speculative parcels in the Bronx that might be used for a community land trust. And students mapped all of the city-owned vacant parcels in the Bronx and are working on developing case studies of development moratoriums that have been used to alleviate gentrification in hot housing markets. So with all of these classes, requires an inordinate amount of preparation. And thank you so much to Sarah, who's been very instrumental in helping with some of the administration of these classes. But it also requires a certain amount of flexibility and grace. Catherine and I are both from planning. We've both seen studio projects go awry. And so in this project, our goal was really to try to develop a solidarity model for this kind of interaction, one that does not necessarily act as sort of student experts providing data, but one that is sort of much more mission aligned and sort of flattens some of the power tensions and structures in the relationship. And I think that we've been mostly successful in doing that. I think that the students have learned also that there are lots of different ways that community-based organizations can go about their work, and that BCDI's approach using centering economic democracy is one way. There's lots of different ways, and we've had some debates in class about what might be the strategy behind that. BCDI, this is a parallel planning process, parallel to the city's planning process, and at some point they're going to have to merge. And that has been a very interesting and fruitful point of discussion and engagement for the students. And Catherine has willingly engaged and been very candid in those discussions as well. So I think overall, we've learned a lot and had a great time. So I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin, who was a student in the fall 2020 Barnard Barnard Engages course, and then also served as a community planning fellow over the summer.
Thank you so much, Professor Rocco, and hello, fellow Barnard Engages community members. It's my honor and pleasure to be in community with you all today. I was offered, as Professor Rocco said, the incomparable opportunity to work under her in supervision as a community planning lab student, where we were positioned as student consultants in Professor Rocco's junior seminar called Dynamics of Neighborhood Change. I also had the opportunity to assist, as Professor Rocco said, as her research fellow during the summer of 2021 through to the present. The work that was cultivated throughout these months would not have been possible without the support of the Barnard Engages New York program. As part of our junior seminar course, we supported Professor Rocco's community planning efforts, working toward enabling a collaborative dialogue and toward taking action to promote systemic racial, economic, and environmental justice in our partnership with the Bronx Collaborative Development Initiative, or BCDI. And we worked especially closely with Program Director Catherine Maya. The work here was varied and interactive, and ultimately I gained a wealth of knowledge and experience in community engaged city planning and facilitation, digital humanities, and research. Of the projects I worked most closely on throughout this time was a participatory budgeting people's budget survey. This technological tool was designed to foster civic engagement and to magnify an asset-based analysis of Bronx communities in order to leverage existing political, social, and economic power. As a member of the data indicators team, I and other group members established a cohesive narrative of economic democracy through defining categories within the New York City budget. We did this specifically under the umbrella of BCDI's definition of economic democracy, which stated that economic democracy is a framework in which people share ownership over the assets and resources in their communities and govern and steward them democratically for a shared purpose. Democracy doesn't just mean more participation, it's about sharing power. Be New York understands this by supporting thought-provoking courses that engage students in the mission and work of community organizations like BCDI. In the first half of our course, Professor Rocco created space for us where we examined theory, literature on community organizing and economic democracy, as well as case studies on what has and has not worked in the past. We then spent the second half of the semester applying what we learned in a real life context, organizing context. And during the summer months, I also worked as Professor Rocco's research fellow, where we worked to bring on the aid of a UX designer who, as Professor Rocco mentioned, we worked with in the Sunrise Movement, along with a software engineer who enabled us to bring the vision of the People's Budget Survey to fruition. After crunching and recrunching the numbers on the New York City budget, a beast of a budget, as Professor Rocco mentioned, as well as beta testing among students and Bronx-wide community members, we gathered input from across all aisles and had a working tool. As part of my experience, I've had the opportunity to learn from Professor Rocco, who has an unparalleled gift of building partnerships with and across community groups. I learned from her how to collaborate and navigate strategic planning, even when there are conflicting ways to approach issues. I also learned what it means to collaborate between academic institutions and community organizations. The realities of building power and leadership from the ground up began to crystallize over these many experiences. Over the summer, I also had the opportunity to attend a series of people's assemblies hosted by BCDI, where we brainstormed about sectors ranging from health, food, energy, and the environment, education and the workforce, and housing. Be New York support brings worlds together through elevating community engagement, and in doing so brings about a future grounded in racial justice, community ownership, and shared wealth one step closer. These people's assemblies challenged me to think creatively. I learned what it looks like to think, to dream, and to make democratic decisions together. And finally, I learned that community engagement is almost never easy, but it's always worthwhile. In closing, I just want to add that any and all folks, but especially if we have any members of the Bronx community with us here today, you can visit bit.ly/BCDI Bronx-wide budget tool to allocate New York City's budget and determine where you think our taxpayer dollars should be going. Thank you so much to Professor Rocco, to Catherine, to Barnard Engages, and to the entire BCDI and Bronx community for giving me an opportunity to learn from you all and to make contributions.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear about Mary's course because she's one of the few people who's taught the course multiple times. And I think it's one of the real strengths for the Barnard Engages program is the continuity and how you're able to build on something, the next semester that you did the previous semester. And also, as Caitlin she's now doing this research on her own. So it goes beyond the classroom. And I think that's the ultimate goal, is to think about how each of us can be transformed, how students can be transformed, and how this can be ongoing, sustaining work. So thank you all so much. So that ends the presentation portion. And thanks to all of you who are on Zoom also joining us. And the rest of us, sadly, for you, will have a chance to have some breakfast. So thanks.